this afternoon, but if not, I can stand in for and give a brief introduction.
Dr. Hickman, I'm here for Dr. Ray.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Collins. Um, and so, Dr. Collins, if you don't mind, just go ahead and give an introduction. We'll move on
Sure,
a little bit about why we're here for today.
sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It is cold today, and no one will let me turn on my heat in my house. So, but thank you all so much for joining us. Dr. Ray actually was on some school visits on the Eastern Shore today. So she was trying to make it back in time, but she couldn't make it back in time to join. And the Zoom doesn't work as well in the car. So, but just thank you. Super excited about today's discussion. So thankful to the group that worked together to really get parent voice. So super excited to hear all of the questions and the discussions today. I think it'll add value to some of the conversations that we've already had. So on behalf of myself and Dr. Rate, again, thank you. For those of you, you all know who I am, Dr. Collins' deputy, but Dr. Wright is just appreciative of this time that you all continue to come together. So I'll turn over to Liz for some welcome and opening comments.
Thank you so much. Good to see you all. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, and then last night I had the opportunity to attend an event that was sponsored by the board of the ARC US, and you probably know the ARC is an organization that was founded in the 1950s by parents of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they've been a leading advocacy voice across the country. And it was the event was in someone's home, and it was a conversation with U.S. Department of Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, talking about the state of education for students with disabilities across the country. So, and it just sort of happened very quickly. But so much of what he said last night reflected the work that we have done together over the last year, and really spoke to the topic that we have tonight, authentic family school partnerships. And I just wanted to share a couple things that he said, because I think it sort of sets a nice context for what we're doing. So some of the things he said are things we've said over and over again over the last year. So he started off talking about how if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. And that's why we really have to continually think differently. He talked about how having low expectations of children, but also how sometimes we have low expectations of the system that serves our children. He talked about special education as a reactive support model for students and for educators, so that we wait till there's a problem, and then we sort of try to dump support on kids and on educators, and that we need to invest both money and time to create a more preventive kind of support model. He talked about how we need to develop systems, not superheroes. And I feel like that's something we've talked a lot about. This isn't just about changing people's hearts and minds. It's about creating a system and a context in which people can be effective and create great outcomes for kids. And then he spent a long time talking about intentional collaboration, and that the way to have success in changing systems involves a process that is intentionally collaborative. And that is obviously what we have done together. And he talked about how the process is the product, that this transparent, open process of laying out a bunch of ideas and coming together and talking about them from all different perspectives and coming up with recommendations, that work, the way that we're doing it, is part of the product that we're producing together. And then he talked about how that mirrors authentic family school partnerships, and that authentic partnership isn't what happens around the IEP table. That it's
too loud for you, dear.
Oh, Buzzy, we can hear you. Starts way before that, when schools and systems recognize that parents are the experts about their children, not the people that have letters after their names sitting around the table. And so that intentional collaboration that we need for systems change is the same intentional collaboration that we need around IEP tables. So anyway, it was all so perfect. I'm scribbling down all these notes so that I could come back and share them with you, but we'll get on to our process tonight, that intentional collaborative process that we are doing so that we can develop systems, not superheroes, so that we can build preventive support for kids and adults, so that we can have high expectations for children and for the system that serves those children. And so that we will stop doing the same thing and we will do something different together. So thanks for being here. And we will move into public comment. And I think I'm handing it over to.
Actually, we're just going to absent Carmen, who usually opens our meetings and facilitates, and left me in charge. I kind of goofed and left out some important stuff. So please make sure, for those of you who are participating, please ensure that your name appears correctly on the screen so we can safely identify you, correctly identify you. Make sure you recognize this. To do so, you select participants at the bottom toolbar of the meeting window, hover over your name, select more desktop or tap your name, and then click on or tap rename. Enter your desired name and click desktop or done if you want to do that. Next slide. So this meeting is being recorded and live streamed via MSDE's YouTube channel. And it is translated, and there's closed captioning, and that's also, you see we have a live translator available for you. Next slide. In our presentation, we'll be going over the welcome and introductions. That's where we are now. We'll have a review of public comment. We'll look at our review of our September feedback. We'll also look at the proposed recommendations. Getting to our discussion of authentic parent and family partnerships. We'll have our small groups and our big group discussions. Then there'll be just provide you with a brief December report update. And then we'll have a wrap up and closing and plan for our November 21st meeting. Thank you. Ms. Zogby. Now we do public comment.
Great. I think that's going to Brian, if I'm not mistaken.
It is correct.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have some feedback here. Please bear with us. Okay, so speakers. It's not working.
Brian, since you helped me earlier today.
This one more time.
One more.
Speakers will be called on in the order of their registration. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and time will be monitored by staff. When the time expires, the speaker is permitted to finish their sentence, but is required to make no further remarks. Comments shall be directed to the entire work group and not to any individual, and work group members will not respond to speakers' comments, but will take all comments under advisement. We have one registered guest, and that is Katrina Dunlop. Katrina, are you there?
I'm looking to see. I don't see where Ms. Dunlap is signed in.
Not see her either.
Okay.
Okay, so
we'll proceed. If Ms. Dunlap joins later, we will provide an opportunity for her to give a comment. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Ms. Zogby, it's you.
All right. So as we do every month, we gathered all of your feedback from the exit tickets and from the small group discussions. We compiled some notes and circulated them. And I'm just going to kind of give that brief overview of what we heard from you around early intervention and early childhood special education. So the first question was around state support for local infants and toddlers programs. Here are a couple of the things we heard a lot. We heard a lot of concerns around reflective coaching, teaming, the primary service provider model. Not that it is a bad model, but there was concerns about its use with fidelity, what kinds of standards there are or should be for selecting a primary service provider, caseloads, how frequently teams meet, the frequency of joint visits, all kinds of things like that, lots of details. Whether the model is appropriately staffed and whether infants and toddlers programs are appropriately staffed, if the training is adequate for folks to use those models with fidelity, whether those models are preventing the kind of individualization that's required for early intervention, and whether MSDE should review potential service delivery models beyond coaching and ensure that direct services aren't being excluded from children's IFSPs. We also heard feedback around the challenge of having a 12-month program that's staffed primarily by 10-month employees. We heard feedback about cross-jurisdictional issues. So what happens when there's a child who lives in one county but may go attend daycare or preschool in a different county? Who provides those services? Who pays for it? We'd heard about limited implementation of assistive technology so that, and when that happens, we have kids who arrive in kindergarten without having a reliable method of communication. The importance of the transition from infants and toddlers into kindergarten, outreach barriers and challenges, especially around language barriers, and outreach through community organizations. Then the second question was around how the state could improve access to high quality inclusive childcare. We heard feedback about the need for increased and improved training for providers, and that training be provided at times and in locations where providers can actually receive it. Resources for childcare providers, and also some things around requirements around the knowledge that childcare providers have around the ADA requirements. Then the third and final question was around Blueprint pre-K expansion and how we can increase access to inclusive, high-quality preschool for students with disabilities that complies with the law and meets the intent of the Blueprint. And so in this area, I think was where we heard sort of very the most common threads. We heard from a lot of people that the students with disabilities should be included in Tier 1 for prioritization for seats and for funding. That we need to meet the challenges for recruiting and preparing private providers. That there are challenges with respect to physical space, particularly for expansion of public school pre-K programs. And also that the funding for students who attend pre-K private providers needs to flow to those providers from the LEAs to provide the special education services and supports that those students have in their IEPs. So that was the feedback that we heard, and I think everybody got a copy of that. And so now we're going to turn to the next slide. We're going to turn to the proposed recommendations, which I'm sorry just went out today, but we'll talk through them together. So there are 3 slides here. I'm going to read through each one, and then we'll pause so that people can ask questions or give feedback. So the first one is with respect to pre-K. So to increase access to inclusive, high-quality pre-K for all 3- and 4-year-old children with disabilities, comply with federal and state law, and meet the intent of the Blueprint to eliminate achievement gaps and ensure that all children are ready for kindergarten. A, the General Assembly should expand Tier 1 to include all 3- and 4-year-old children with disabilities, regardless of family income, for prioritization for seats and for full funding. B, MSDE shall ensure that 3- and 4-year-olds with disabilities who attend publicly funded pre-K programs receive the services and supports they need by providing guidance to the LEA, holding LEAs accountable for the distribution and monitoring of Blueprint special education weight funding, along with guidance on the different funding streams for pre-K students with disabilities. And then C, MSDE should develop a plan for a plan within 60 days with tasks and timelines to meet the specific challenges of pre-K expansion and a mixed delivery system that will meet the needs of students with disabilities, including recruiting and preparing private pre-K providers, transportation, and facilities requirements. So we'd love to hear your feedback, questions, accolades, whatever works for you.
I think you were trying to say comments, complaints, and compliments.
Oh, yep, that works too. Mhm. Okay, I'm reading that as this is a perfect reflection of what the work group was recommending.
Since there's no one from the special
Okay.
work group saying anything, I'm going to agree with you. I think you did capture what was stated in the groups. I think this recommendation does give us an opportunity, one, to show how not only that it's MSDE part of this, but from the recommendation, it's going to require others. It's going to require members of the work group to lobby for changes to A. It's not one that we own alone. For B, in terms of making sure that we're holding LEAs accountable for the distribution and monitoring, we definitely need to provide some guidance, some clear support, and some clear information to the LEAs on how to do that. And then that plan for a plan is something that's definitely doable. And we receive that information from the work group and the small group. So if it's any indication, I think that we should move forward with that one.
Great. All right, let's go to the next slide. The second part is around childcare. So MSDE should develop a plan for a plan within 90 days with specific tasks and timelines to improve access to high quality, inclusive childcare for infants, toddlers, and young children with disabilities. The plan should address the need for increased and improved provider training that is on-site or at accessible times and includes knowledge on the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act and inclusive practices beyond behaviorist approaches. B, increased resources for providers to prioritize inclusion. And C, staffing needs through partnerships with institutions of higher education and high school programs. So any thoughts or feedback or questions on that?
Yeah, for A, will MSDE provide technical assistance to the local LEAs on how we can get consistent messaging across the state as far as the services that need to be provided and the training that goes with it?
Dr. Cook, please.
I can speak to that. This was focused on childcare providers, and they have different standards around ADA. Liz probably can speak to this better than me. ADA, it differs a little bit about how they're treated in the law. And so this is focused on ensuring that training is accessible and more frequent for childcare providers to access. Liz, if I missed anything.
No, that's right. I think that's right. I think that this is sort of and I want to respond to David's question too in the chat, which is around the emphasis on behaviorist approaches. I think that that part A is really responding to conversations and feedback that we heard around the reasons why so many families struggle to both find and keep childcare for their children with disabilities, that they that providers need more access and training to understand what are reasonable accommodations that they are required by law to make, and also what are the best practices for and what are the ways they may need to shift the way they think about providing structures and services to kids that that works for a wider swath of children. So I think that's the emphasis there.
And so is this being viewed as voluntary, or is there like going to be some type of a mandatory piece, or is there a contingent upon if a provider does access that training, there is some type of a incentive?
So this is, sorry.
No, go.
This is mandatory under COMAR. And so all providers are getting this training right now. I think the goal is to make it more accessible and more frequent. That's the goal and kind of like the next level to this work. But this is already required under COMAR, and really it's about transitioning beyond the ADA requirements and really talking about how to implement this and make this work. We do have some model programs in the state that focus on this. For instance, we used ARP funds, one-time funds to support Kennedy Krieger and becoming kind of a model program where childcare providers can come and view what that looks like to have a very inclusive environment that's meeting the needs of all children and is following those policies in a childcare setting. So it's about really kind of right now in childcare, we're really focused on training, and we're right now at MSDE under Dr. Collins' leadership, Dr. Wright's leadership, we're trying to shift those dynamics to really focus on professional learning and improving instructional practices. And so that's really what this, I think, 2A is really speaking to.
Thanks, Dr. Cook. Jade, did you have a question or comment?
So two comments. The first, specific to that training on the ADA, sometimes the providers need that knowledge so that they can push back on the other family members who are pushing them. Because I had to help educate in my daughter's childcare, when something came up. So it's not always through the lens of how do we solve the problem with the child, but also how do we empower the providers to be able to be holding strong and educating the parents who are pushing them to do something that actually is discriminatory. So I just want to reinforce that from that lens as well. On the staffing needs through partnerships with institutions of higher education and high school programs, I feel like that list might be a little limiting. I know that the State Department of Labor has earned grants that allow employers, of which some of the childcare providers, like the Goddard School and so forth, might be able to submit for. The local America's Job Centers have vendors that they provide funding for training and so forth. And even the Division of Rehabilitation Services, which is under the State Department of Education. So I'd like to see that final point C broadened to include some of the other potential resources to address the workforce needs as well.
Absolutely. Jade, you're speaking my language. I'm super excited about the comments you made. I think one of the things that we try to do, and we actually presented this in our last state board meeting, is really empower childcare providers to share information about all of the different resources to families and do that kind of warm touch handoff, because we know they're the ones that are working with our families, particularly our infants and toddlers, or every single day. And early intervention we know works and it's proven. And the sooner we get folks access, the better. One of the things we're trying to do is think through possible solutions as to what those barriers are, what that breakdown are, And to your point, families being skeptical of more, government touch points potentially. And so we are thinking about how to break down those barriers and really think through how to streamline communication. We had a brochure that was released to families, that was released to childcare providers last year. We are now working with Division of Early Intervention Special Education to make it better and improve it, beef it up, so that folks have access. And we're also looking at touch points like hospitals when children are born. We have a calendar that goes out to all the hospitals in the state, and we've gone through that whole calendar, Dr. Hickman's team again, and added a lot of all the services that you mentioned, just so that that's more accessible to families and is coming at them from multiple different touch points that they see every day. So your point is very well taken there. The family focus is really important. We also have a new office in the Division of Early Childhood that I'm so excited about. It's called the Office of Family Support Services and Head Start Collaboration. And their sole focus is about how do we think about the system in a systematic way and really make sure that we're creating a user-centered design that meets families where they are so that they can thrive. Vanessa Jones is one of our directors who leads that work. In terms of your second half of your question on access to increasing the number of staff, we are looking at some of the administrative burden and the multiple different staffing qualifications in childcare that really limit access. And so we do have a work group that is forming soon. We sent out an interest form and got over 250 folks who responded and said they were interested. So now we're creating an application so we can whittle that down to a manageable work group that represents the child early care and education field. But that group is in partnership with the Accountability Implementation Board and Maryland Higher Education Commission to really think about ways that we can create a true career ladder for early care and education programs and make sure that we expand the number of access points for them to obtain an education at little to no cost. So we have funding streams that are dedicated to childcare providers, but we called and one, for instance, is the Child Care Career and Professional Development Fund. But there's other funds that the Institution of Higher Education, or that Institutions of Higher Education have, and Maryland Higher Education Commission have identified that can support this segment of the workforce. We also have been in close partnership with Department of Labor to talk about apprenticeship programs. We started off with 0 registered apprenticeship programs in early childhood about 2 years ago, and now we have 4. We're still thinking about how to sustain their funding, but we have 4 registered apprenticeship programs for early childhood in our state, and those are for the incumbent workforce. We also have many more registered apprenticeship programs for youth, and that's aligned with the Career and Technical Education program. So this is also written in MSD's implementation plan. So a lot of work and effort is being done to support increasing staffing needs. I think the angle we were thinking about specifically for the special education work group was to really think about teacher preparation and then on-the-job training and making sure that childcare providers, early childhood education teachers have the skills and necessary to support inclusion. And so that's where we're trying to move, and maybe that 2C doesn't capture that, but that was kind of the thought process behind that from MSDE.
Okay, and I read C as sort of being a straight workforce issue and increasing the workforce. And I just wanted to make certain that you guys aren't leaving or overlooking potential resources, recognizing that there are many folks that don't look to institutions of higher education for a variety of reasons, whereas the labor sort of America's job centers and their vendor training models and so forth do. So just making certain that you guys are connecting all of the dots, because workforce is workforce, and I just want to make certain you guys aren't missing any of the partners and any of the potential resources that can get you guys the workforce that you need. So
yeah, if there's
I
others
want to
that
say,
we miss as we kind of solidify that plan, feel free to point that out. This has been an ongoing conversation. We produced a report last year for AIB on this. We also had several collaborative meetings with early care and education providers across the state about what was needed and what some of the barriers are. We, for instance, recognize that multilingual providers sometimes face barriers, for instance, especially to higher education. If you look at HB 1441, it also kind of opens up the staff qualification, gives credit for prior learning, experience, and skills, and also takes into account childcare providers who receive their degree from other countries or a degree in other fields, and also no degree. And what does that mean, and what does that look like for them becoming lead teachers in their profession? So lots of conversations that another work group is going to flesh out, but we're happy to report back to this work group where we are.
Thank you.
Dr. Cook, thank you so much for that. And thanks for bringing attention to the fact that we're definitely going to have to work together in early EI and special education and early childhood to get this. Let's draw the team's attention to the fact that we are, in this particular recommendation, we're just developing a plan for the plan. And it sounds like we will have the components needed and necessary. And when we bring it back for review, if there's any additions to it, we'll be more than happy to add to that. Liz, I think you need to take a vote in essence of time.
Great.
And then move to the third one.
Any additional concerns that anybody wants to raise before we go with approval here? Jade, I'm thinking maybe we'll change that through to an including, just so that we're clear that that's not the only avenue that we're talking about. Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to move this one forward and go to our last one. We're starting to run behind here, and I don't want to limit our conversation. All right. So the last one is MSDE should develop a plan for a plan within 90 days with specific tasks and timelines to improve the state's support for local infants and toddlers programs in implementing evidence-based practices in early intervention to meet the individual needs of children with disabilities and their families. The plan should address standards and guidance to ensure fidelity of implementation of reflective coaching, teaming, authentic assessment, and primary service provider models, as well as the use of other evidence-based practices, including implementation of assistive technology, family-centered practices, routines-based intervention within the natural environment, and service delivery models as needed. Guidance for local infants and toddlers programs on cross-jurisdictional service provision, guidance and updates on policy changes for local infants and toddlers programs on staffing challenges related to a 12-month program staffed with primarily 10-month employees, outreach barriers and challenges, and guidance on the roles and responsibilities of each of the 3 agencies responsible for the implementation of early intervention services. So questions, comments? And that one is, this one is really a straight plan for a plan. And I think we just tried to capture kind of all the feedback that we got and to make sure that MSDE will, as they develop that plan, include reference to all of those concerns that have been raised. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to say we're going to move forward with that. And if anybody has any late breaking concerns or questions, please feel free to raise those after the meeting. But otherwise, we're going to go with that one. And now we are on to authentic parent and family partnerships with schools. And we're going to turn it over to Dr. Hickman.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And thanks, team, again. Liz, like you, when you started off today, you said, I had a plan for what I was going to say and thinking about what I was going to say, but then some things happened. a few things happened. I had an opportunity to meet with several groups in the past few weeks. One of the groups was, you'll hear some of the results from a group that participated in a survey and participated in a focus group. And then I had opportunity to meet with another group who represents our children with developmental disabilities. And then as recent as today, meeting with our CSAC members and hearing some feedback and concerns, but mostly when speaking of concern, flipping that around to talk about the importance of authentic family partnerships in the work that we do. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of authentic family partnerships, the IDA has many requirements that reflect on the importance of families and various special ed processes. With each reauthorization of IDEA, families are given more and more voice and have been in the educational decision-making for the children, and they are expected to be equal partners at the IEP table, with the voice about decisions made for their student, input on their educational services, as well as when they, what they do when they leave school. So from the start of school all the way to transitioning to post-secondary, parents have voice in that, and afterwards in the public school. Over time, our families, they've been given the right to simply revoke special ed services without resorting to litigation. In Maryland, they have the right to consent or not consent for their child to participate in certain assessments, certain behavior interventions that are included in their IEP or their behavior intervention plan. Like most things, partnerships require equal footing. For it to be a true partnership, there has to be some give and take. There must be based on a foundation of trust. And a lot of conversations we hear where the trust is broken is where things go awry. But we also heard a number of parents and participants and advocates talk about how valuable the partnership is and how it works at their location. So we see that the partnership must be based on trust, sharing of information being accurate, understanding, having respect, and most importantly, having the common goal of putting the student first and foremost. There have been decades of studies showing what's important, the true relationship, how a true parent-school partnership should work. At Hopkins, Joyce Epstein proposed a framework of 6 types of parent involvement. Let me read those. Reciprocal support, where families support their children as students and schools understand their children's families. Communication, co-design by both home and school to go both ways. Promoting volunteerism to include families and student activities. Providing ideas for learning at home to carry school and curriculum into the home, and including parents as leaders in decision-making in the school while collaborating with the community, services, resources, and partners. So really pretty much a circle of involvement, engagement, conversation, being open to the fact that the parents are a part of the team and trying to make sure there's equal footing. Next slide, please. So the next is like addressing the power imbalance. Now, if you've attended an IEP meeting, anyone who knows, there are typically more school staff participating in the meeting than family members. At some point, this is required by law for the participants of an IEP meeting and necessary just to make sure that all the students' educational program is fully discussed. However, we recognize that can be intimidating at times for parents, and it takes affirmative effort to make the families feel valued and that their voice is at least equally as important and respected as decision makers in the meeting. As someone who's been a part of hundreds of IEP meetings, it is one of the things, it's a strategy. You have to be intentional, you have to be focused, and you have to have a mindset where an understanding that the parents are the experts on how their children learn. They teach their children every day. They know what works and doesn't work in the home and the community. Their voice is important. Now we have to flip that and say, parents, well, teachers know the curriculum. They know how the student reacts to school. They know what works and what doesn't work in what setting. There comes the strategy of putting the two together and creating consistent expectations on the two learning environments and how they can increase student achievement. Communicating what is happening in each learning environment is essential. And so listening to, including the family in the IEP meeting, into the decisions, not just the parent input section of the IEP, but throughout the IEP, and ensuring that everything is being done is inclusive and that everything is understood by all the parents, including in their native language. So that way the parent can fully participate. At times, I'm sorry, next slide. At times we aren't as successful in building those partnerships. As you know, as mentioned, they are based on trust. But in a family-school partnership, the family has to trust the school will do the best for the child, and the school has to trust that the family will support them. And from data collected by Gershwin in 2020, it reflects that a lack of or broken trust is one of the main causes of disputes between families and school professionals. As we looked at our data in MSDE about the number of state complaints over the past few years, the number of due processes, and even when we get to resolution, we see that in those conversations, it becomes about trust. The trust is broken somehow by one party or another, and it is quite difficult to get that back together, and legislation, complaints that doesn't work. But we do have some things that are in place. Parents have a intricate set of procedural safeguards to resolve disputes. It is an approach that emphasizes collaborative decision making. It emphasizes reinforcing and trying to remove the power imbalance. If we use a model using mutual respect for the roles in education, the student, the family, there can be some resolution, but there's also opportunities for that. As you see that Maryland has the 8th highest rate of dispute resolution activities, but in the country. So for 21-22. So we're working on that. Next slide. So what are we doing and how do we do that briefly? So Maryland's efforts in addressing the family partnerships, we do have a family support branch. Maryland is helping and trying to foster and encourage family school partnerships. It is one of the few states that has a family support branch. I see that as an office for a number of calls come through where there's, it's customer service basically. It's a customer service network set up for our families to call in when they're having some difficulty navigating the system. Since '99, we've had this team. Now we have a team with a section chief, 3 specialists. They assist families with anything and everything related to navigating education, specifically special education. In that branch, they provide information, resources, support. They serve as a go-between between the school and the family. They field over 1,000 complaints and concerns or calls each year and have cases that span over years. They give support to informal dispute resolution where possible, and they assist the families with that resolution when it's not possible. A local education agency or LEA or schools, they also have family support teams. Our MSDE Family Support Branch meets with them monthly. They meet monthly to provide via regional or state meetings or even with districts to ensure that they are informed on any changes of federal state law. They get topical content. We look at trends in the data. We look at providing strategies and working with our other branches to provide that support. We try to enforce the 5-day rule, making sure that parents receive the documents that they need in advance. We encourage them, support, and review that right. We have regular relations that require that they be provided with the copies, and sometimes we have to remind of any of that information. Maryland has a parent training and information center, the Parents Place of Maryland. It is Parents Place of Maryland that provides families with one-to-one support, training, leadership programs, and materials. Going to yield to them very briefly to Ms. Renee Everett-Cizzoni to share how we most recently worked together to even put this presentation and to get accurate data. In my comments to you, I've shared some of the things that, what it looks like, what it should look like, and what we're doing in Maryland. But from the conversation that we most recently had with parents, and through a survey, we see some results that we need to work on. Ms. Avery Senzona, you're up. I don't think you need any more introduction than that, but
No, I don't, but thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Hickman. Next slide, please. So yeah, so like next slide, please. So as Dr. Hickman shared, we partnered, which is we're trying to model family school partnership here. So just want to give a brief background before we jump into the survey results that we have here. So one of the things Dr. Hickman talked about, IDEA's commitment to families, and every time IDEA has been reauthorized, the family's voice has been reinforced and strong, as made stronger. But it doesn't magically happen. And the Congress in their infinite wisdom said, we've got to put in a mechanism so that we can support families to become their child's best advocate. So an additional piece in IDEA's commitment to this is the funding of the federally funded parent training information centers. There is one of us in every single state. Some states have more. Dr. Hickman's former home has 3. So, and that's but for the state of Maryland, it is us at the Parents Place of Maryland. So we are funded directly from the Office of Special Education Programs to do the things that IDEA wants of families. Next slide, please. So just a little bit, I've already told you, we are the Special Education and Health Center. We have been doing this work for over 30 years, and we are unique, like all of our other counterparts across the country. So we are governed by families, and we are led by families. So everyone on my team, including myself, has been there, done that in the special education process. So that really helps us when we're working with families. Next slide, please. This is our mission. And OSEP is very clear that our mission must be one around empowerment, and that the family is the expert, and we operate from this place. And it is our job just to help families get to that place. And we stay with a family for as long as they need us to stay with them. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Hickman shared, we do one-on-one assistance with families. The other piece that we do, because this is so complicated, is we take very complicated evidence-based practices, research, policies, and procedures, and turn it into easy to understand factual information that is non-biased, non-judgmental, so that families can learn all of this learn it with our support, and then in turn make the best decisions for their families, and of course all of the trainings as well that we do that. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, this is what we hope we are helping families, is to really truly understand, because when you find out you have a child with a disability, it can rock your world, and it's a whole nother world that you're entering into. And then you put the law on top of it, the language, the power imbalance, all of those pieces, that it is really a lot. But this is our goal, is what we will help families. This will be our ultimate outcome. Next slide, please. So what your guys are really here to hear about is the survey results that we did in partnership with MSDE. So we did do a very brief online survey for our families across the state, and it was tight. We literally gave families a 1-week turnaround, and we simply asked them 4 simple questions around: do they feel supported as equal members of their child's team? What is working well? Because we really do want to be solution oriented in this. And then sharing really specific examples, right? Liz is very great at saying, okay, what is concrete here that we can leave with to make these recommendations, as well as Dr. Wright and Dr. Hickman. And then, of course, what are the barriers with that? And then what would folks suggest to strengthen those partnerships? Because the turnaround was so tight on the online survey, we also did it in English and we did it in Spanish. We then did pull together a virtual roundtable of professionals, but it was a very small group of professionals that serve families from a very wide and diverse background. So it took into geographic representation, took in language, took in different disabilities, so that we really tried to do a nice diverse group, and that was co-facilitated by Dr. Hickman and myself. Next slide, please. All right, so the online survey. So we asked families. So as you guys can read, 55% did actually feel that they were equal members of the IEP team, which is great. But this was the reason, these were the main reasons why families felt that they were heard, why they felt like they were equal members. And it goes back to the core principles and the research that Dr. Hickman shared earlier, is that they felt heard and valued, and that there was consistent and ongoing communication. But 45% did not feel as equal members. And just the converse was true, right? Not being heard, not feeling valued, not enough updates, communications. It's like we have an IEP meeting and it became a black hole that not only did families express that they wanted more training, but really felt like school staff needed more training, and that language was definitely a significant barrier to feeling valued and heard. Next slide, please. All right, so how could the partnership be strengthened? Are y'all seeing a theme here? Communication, right? But it needs to be friendly communication. It's all about building those relationships and transparency. Include parents in the planning and decision-making. Help families to better understand their IEPs, more training for teachers, and specifically was called out was a Hispanic liaison. We'll talk a little bit more about the whole liaison cultural broker when we get to the virtual roundtable. Dee, I see your question. Yes, we did not ask the age of the child or the LEA, but we did ask the county, and we asked the race and the ethnicity as well. Next slide, please. So that was the online survey. So now let's go to the virtual roundtable. So for the virtual roundtable, when asked the question that do the families they feel that they work with and support if they felt like they were equal members of the team, and of course 100% unfortunately reported no. Again, a very consistent theme here. Language barriers, not feeling valued, very little communication, unable to understand the decisions, and that there was a distinct power imbalance when families reported at the IEP meetings by the professionals that support them. And I should pause here and say, Dr. Hickman, if there's anything, you were obviously co-facilitated this with me, and Liz was there as well. So if there's anything that I am missing, please, by all means, chime in here.
You've captured it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next slide, please. So again, want to be solution oriented. So what is working well? At the virtual roundtable, when there were really well-trained IEP teams and chairs, it made a huge, significant difference in the IEP process for families. Cultural brokers. So the folks that were on the virtual roundtable represented folks that spoke Spanish, represented folks that were from Africa, also represented our AAPI community. So there was really a very strong and robust conversation about cultural brokers, which is much broader than just simple interpretation. And that's a very powerful message. Partnerships with community organizations, and this stemmed from the mistrust that a lot of families have, is that community organizations can be those bridges to help repair relationships and build trust. Really, when schools will to become partners, again, clear communication using a very holistic approach, and time for staff to observe the student, as well as participating in the IEP meetings, feeling that they bring incredible information and expertise that make the IEP a more robust, and also speak to that holistic approach with that. Next slide, please. So barriers, overwhelmed school staff, power imbalance, meeting times not convenient. And this one popped up a lot, particularly for working parents that can't take off. Poorly trained IEP teams, and not having the right information and resources to make informed decisions. IEPs not being translated, and not enough resources for schools and families. So again, very consistent themes with this. Next slide. So what could we do to strengthen it? 3 guesses, and it starts with a C. That would be communication. And it needs to be communication, and this came across, again, you guys have the full report, but really communication that isn't based in jargon, and really help families to understand what it is that is being written in the IEP and what schools are doing. Cultural brokers, training, update on MSDE guidance documents, understanding immigrant family needs, which is huge here in Maryland, and being flexible with meeting times. All right, I think one more slide. So it's just a thank you. If anybody has questions, they can reach out. But Liz, unless there was anything else, Dr. Hickman, I'm going to turn it back to Liz next.
I'll go a little bit just to say thank you. Thanks for the collaboration. Again, the message that Secretary Cardona mentioned is also in alignment with, most recently I participated at the National Association of State Special Education Directors. Valerie Williams presented, OSEP director, and also the secretary, Glenna Wright Gallo. And the conversation was in alignment. It just fell right in place with our knowing that we were going to have this conversation about authentic partnerships, but more importantly, the charge to the state directors was for us to work more closely with our PTI. And so I'm new on the scene, but I've heard how successful it can go. Some of the things that are successful between MSD and PTI, and it's something that I value. And so thank you, Renee. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We can move on to.
You're welcome. Thank you for the partnership.
You're welcome as well. So we will, I think I just opened a small part for the breakout groups, and then I'll pass it to Nate in a little while. Let's get ready for our breakout groups, and it will be, next slide will help me, please. We continue, as you already know, we've continued to use random grouping for our breakout groups. You will be automatically assigned the group to move to, except for group 1, which will not move. When you receive the notification asking you to move to a breakout group, please click move to the breakout group. Because of our numbers, we're trying to make sure that everyone has a good opportunity to participate. Please use the chat if you have additional comments so their feedback can be recorded. Breakout group 1 will be live streamed, and all will be recorded and posted on the MSDE website. As you note, our sign language interpreters will remain in breakout room 1, and it will be live streamed. Each breakout group is assigned an MSDE staff as a note taker, and each breakout group is asked to please identify a facilitator, a timekeeper, and a person to report out. So remember that. Try to do that as soon as you get in the group. We need a facilitator, timekeeper, and a reporter. And MSD staff are to serve as note takers. There are 6 total questions. I don't think so. I don't think we have 6. No, we have 4 questions, and we have 4 questions this time. Sorry about that. but don't feel compelled to answer that. This slide stayed. Next slide, please. So during these breakout sessions, the group norms, please speak with care. Please speak from your own experience and be mindful of how your comments may impact others. Use I statements and avoid speaking for or generalizing whole groups. Listen respectfully. Avoid interrupting the person speaking and talk that evaluates, judges their comments. Limit your comments to 1 to 2 minutes. Understand that there are no right or wrong answers. Lean in, lean back, give your input, and make space for others to do the same. Be aware of your talk time and try to stay on topic. Very good. So, Mr. Levinson, is this time for you, or you'll pick it up after the large group?
I'll pick it up after the large group.
Okay, fantastic. So we're at 5:05. Ms. Ivy, we're only like 5-10 minutes behind. Do we still want to give to 5:35 or 5:40?
Let's go 5:40, and then
Okay.
we'll do time for our report out.
All right, 5:40 it is. If there's nothing on the next slide, I think that's when we come back. So, correct. Small group breakout questions. These are your 4 questions. Note takers or group members, make sure that you're aware of the questions and share them, and you can answer them as you like. All right. Are we at breakout time, staff?
We are moving to breakout groups right now.
Thank you. Well, friends, it looks like we're group 1.
Excellent.
Excellent. And I've been with Renee, so I'm not going to do it to you, Renee.
I was going to say,
I'm not. I promise.
Don't.
I'm
Please
not.
don't.
I'm not. It's going to be Beth or it's going to be Josh. But I mean, well, somebody has to facilitate. I'm going to make assignments so we can move on. I would like for Jade to facilitate.
I would be happy to facilitate if someone could just drop the questions in the chat so I have them handy. Thanks everyone.
Wait a minute. We have one more. So Molly's going to take notes. Jade's going to be facilitator. It's going to be who's on here we have to do. It's going to be Josh, the best cropper, that are going to have to share out when we get back.
I don't mind. I'll take notes this time. I didn't last time. I will take notes. I promise, because I was told ahead of time, so I will do it.
Okay.
Communication. See how that works?
Yeah, I will do it. So thank you, Dr. Hickman.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got all the positions filled, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So the first question is, what are the specific areas of capacity building needed within our schools and systems to support authentic family-school partnership? And then it's a 2-parter. How should the state support this capacity building?
So in my school, we have 2 we're considered a community school, and we have 2 family support specialists who are full-time, who, assist with, they speak different languages, and they serve to help the, sort of go between the staff and the parents. I know I've used their assistance just with help, parent conferences translating or meetings translating. And they do various activities with the parents in the school. This is the first time I've been in a school that's had those specialists, and it really helps take a weight off the staff. Whereas before, let's say all the communication particularly went through me as a classroom teacher. So it's a very nice help to have.
So you're saying it serves as a resource to you as a teacher, in addition to it being a support to the families?
It's a resource to the parents. It's a resource to myself. They assist, for example, they'll assist as my students are getting ready to, as they start entering, the age, once they turn 18, they help them fill out the guardianship paperwork. They help them getting with their filling out paperwork for Medicaid, for DDA. They can make appointments. They can make appointments and come in and get help with various amounts of things. Sometimes I don't even know the parents have been in the school. They're like, "Oh, I saw so-and-so's parent today." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So again, it brings that whole kind of school community feeling, like they can come for employment support. If they having trouble finding a dentist, that'll see, that'll see a patient with a significant cognitive disability. It kind of helps. It helps take stress off them, which takes stress off of us, or it just, like you said, makes it a partnership.
Great. And that's available for all the students receiving special education services in your school?
Well, I'm at a school, a separate school exclusively for students. But it is a school community school. It is a school community school. One of my kids in Anne Arundel County went to a community school, and they also had parent engagement specialists there too. Now that school was a lot larger than my school in terms of student population wise, but the folks in those positions basically basically did the same thing.
Similar function. Okay, thank you. So other thoughts, comments about capacity building and how can the state support expansion of that capacity?
I have a suggestion, cultural competency training for educators on diverse family backgrounds, values and expectations, just to include create those inclusive environments for our students of color and our students with disabilities, those marginalized populations. I think that if that comes from the state, we do our own training, but I think it would really be nice. The state did a great job doing a behavior training, a whole series last year. It was amazing. Got great feedback for it. I'd love to see something like that for this. For cultural competency. I think it would be awesome. It would help with disproportionality, but it would also help with family partnerships.
And I think that, the interesting thing about the diverse families is you see that diversity sort of start in pockets and then spread throughout the state. And so, for example, like Montgomery County historically, but now Frederick County has started to see that growth. And so rather than making each sort of new school system sort of figure out how to deal with a diverse population that, has just sort of relocated from another school system that developed that knowledge and competency, I think you're right, trying to sort of, we need to acknowledge that diversity is statewide and is spreading across the state, and just systematize it and have it be the state that's pushing that information out and helping you all, rather than forcing you guys to figure out when suddenly a new population pops up that you need to figure out that cultural competency. Other thoughts regarding capacity?
Sorry, I was just going to add that I think it's, however it happens, but I think it's really important for staff in a building to understand the community that they're serving. And there are different ways that I've been involved in different school systems that have done that. Also, just inviting families in, and I know sometimes the issue might be that there's a cost associated with it, but if we invite families, we come in and help provide the childcare, and then families can. I've done this actually. Josh had mentioned Anne Arundel. I was involved in down in Anne Arundel where with our families, our Spanish-speaking families, where we would bring those families in, and then we would work on kind of share with them strategies and different things they can use at home to help develop their child's language skills and those kinds of things. And it was, you really start to build that relationship. And then also I feel like when we get to like the IEP process and those kinds of things, a lot of IEPs may have homeschool communication in there, but what does that really mean? You know, how does that happen? What does the communication need to be? I feel like it's like we stick it in there and we know it's important, but then there's never really a conversation around what does that mean, so that we make sure that we're really addressing it. So I think everybody has the right thoughts and intentions, but I think sometimes we just move through things really fast, which is hard for families who do not know anything that we're talking about. So I always say, if you're going to use your big words, make sure that you're also going to include an example of what that is so that a family can understand it.
Have any of the local school systems heard about plain language and the executive order that the governor signed about using plain language in documents and so forth? Is that a familiar concept with anyone? Because I'm wondering to what degree using some of the principles of plain language and making that something that we build out sort of at the state level with that capacity, you know, so that when information's coming to individuals and families, it's an intentionally being written in a way that makes it easier for broad populations to understand and to know what it means, and therefore, you know, I always sort of think if you read something and you already don't understand it, we've already started that disengagement process, right? Like if the first communication is something that makes you as a parent feel like you're stupid because you don't understand it, we've already started from behind the 8 ball and sort of building that positive partnership. And so maybe thinking about building out that capacity and learning more about plain language and how that might be able to help facilitate that engagement. Other thoughts about?
I just had a comment, Ms. Gingrich, on that. That plain language would need to be in the Maryland State IEP, because there's lots of parts of the IEP when you're doing the IEP meeting that you are bound by regulations to read word for word verbatim. So I, as the chair of the meeting, I can, you know, after I read it, I can sort of give my, you know, I can explain it, but it would be much, much more helpful if plain language was already in there. And then this is a little bit just off. This is outside my area of expertise, but I just think it would be a godsend if there was something installed in the program where I could click a button and all of a sudden everything gets translated to whatever language, you know, the IEP. That would be a real big help.
Josh, touch base with me. I'll show you how to do it.
I mean, not just loading everything in Google Translate. I'm talking about in Maryland Online, an entire IEP or an Appendix A, or.
I'm going to put you in touch with my secretary.
Okay.
Okay.
But that also sounds like something that there may be a solution already out there. We probably need to figure out how to capture it, write it up, and make certain that everybody has the capacity to access that knowledge. So.
And
great.
And also and also the ability to sign full, like a doc. I know some forms have a DocuSign way, but more and more way for forms to be signed online or through a mobile device, just because, as mentioned before, parents are working. Parents, I have a parent doesn't come to won't ever come into school unless it rains because they work on roofs. So it's just something to that effect to make it more accessible.
Okay.
Ms. Cropper and Mr. Schechter or whomever, are you invited to the MOIEP work group? Are you aware there's one like next week on the 22nd? No, next week. I don't know the date. Forgive me. Okay. So can we bring that? I mean, that's something we've heard before, but also a kind of solution might be helpful to talk
Yeah,
about.
so and Josh, I agree with you 100%. The ability to sign all those forms electronically in today's world, we need that. We absolutely need that. And the language is tough for parents to understand in Maryland Online IEP. I agree with that as well. And then translating the IEP. Yeah, especially those obscure those languages. I shouldn't say obscure language.
Infrequent.
Infrequent. Thank you. There's infrequent languages that we don't often have. The ones you hear and you're like, oh, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, any other comments? If not, we'll move on to number 2. How can state policy and guidance ensure that parents are full and equal partners in the special education process? For example, addressing language and cultural barriers, ensuring parents are fully informed, etc.
I know that MSDE has the like a series of almost like documents for families to go and which is great, but I think it would, and I apologize if this does happen and I'm just not aware of it, but I feel like what sometimes families need is not to just try to read that stuff to understand it, but maybe if there were like periodic workshops or there was a recorded video in their native language or whatever, that might support that. I think that would be helpful. What I find with a lot of parents is that they don't want to say they don't know what that means, right? And because we're all sitting there staring at them, at the table. So I always make it a point usually to sit next to families instead of like being opposite and those kinds of things, and asking them questions and talking about, their child to share. We always seem to talk about all the things the kid can't do. So I try to make sure we spend some time talking about all the awesome things they do, and what they contribute to their classroom and everything else. So, but I think that having opportunities for families to engage in having conversations about what things mean, I think would go a long way, especially for families who culturally are uncomfortable with their child being identified as having a disability. And then some of that could also support staff who are engaging with those families to support that child.
And Lisa, I wonder about your point about that because I think you're right. I think it very much becomes a deficit-based conversation. And if there's anything that state policy or guidance might be able to do to sort of build out some strengths-based questions or things to start on the front end to help sort of, as a matter of course, start things on a positive foot. And again, I don't know if it falls under state policy or guidance. I mean, I think it's maybe one of those like good practice. Maybe it's a good practice guide and identifying what some of the good practices are, because I think that that's an excellent practice, because I think you get a lot further with a parent if you've started what the positives about their kid, rather than immediately going into, here are all the things they can't do, you know.
And I feel like that's sort of how the present levels are set up. Like I always write mine with like strengths. These are all the wonderful things, the skills. This is what your kiddo can do. And then these are the things that he's still or she's still struggling with, that we're going to see that addressed in the rest of the IEP. And then the other part of my conversation is how we're going to use those strengths to support those needs, so that, you know, we're going to, you know, build your kiddo up. And then even going through like the parent input on PLAF part 2, like going through parent input and being respectful of that input. But that also shouldn't be the only time parents have input. And I feel like sometimes that is what happens. Some parents will write statements and send them and have them kind of cut and paste into the IP, but parents, and I know some of it is because like the length of time, the documents are long, but there's not a lot of conversation during IEP meetings. It's a lot of somebody talking.
It's not an interactive process. Yeah.
And I know it's hard. That's a difficult thing to achieve, but that's another reason why I usually will call families prior to the IEP meeting and say, are there anything specifically that you're definitely going to want to discuss? That way we can be prepared. And if there are things that they feel comfortable with, then I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that unless something comes up, but I'm going to make sure that I'm addressing whatever their concerns are. And also for families who, if it's like their first time into like the special ed process, we typically meet with them outside of an IEP meeting to kind of talk about the process and the procedural safeguards and those kinds of things, so that they understand and say, you can always come back at any time and ask a question. It's a lot of stuff, because we know it's a lot of stuff. Staff have trouble, you know, sometimes keeping track of all the things. So, but just letting them know that like we're all in it together.
I jump in. Hate to be the
Oh,
bearer.
sorry.
No, I just going to be the bearer of bad news. Time is ticking.
Okay, so we're going to move on to 3. Yeah. So what specific changes would you recommend within the special education process, including the resolution of disagreements and disputes, that would maintain and reinforce trust and positive family-school partnership?
I'd like to see maybe just the guidance from the state, you know, since we have lots of things to read before, you know, mandatory to read during an IEP, just something kind of like what we read before this meeting about, you know, leaning in, leaning out, not using I statements, just to set the tone. I've had over the years various meetings where parents have brought in advocates, and well, it's a lot of times it's been rough and rough from the get-go. And I think now then again, I've had some very pleasant meetings too, but just to set the tone that, hey, this is not this is not Perry Mason here, so let's, you know, we're trying to have this partnership here, let's maybe you know, take it down a notch.
Where do you think that sort of coming in sort of ready for a fight comes from? Is it because of their previous experiences and with the IEP process, or what they've heard from other people? I mean, because I'm thinking, you know, why are they coming in already sort of feeling that way, and because we need to get to whatever the source is that's driving that. So because, you know, there's nothing, it's going to be harder for you to course correct if they're already coming in.
I mean, I've had meetings where this is, you know, it's my first time with the student, and there's an advocate there, and the tone is very adversarial. Then again, I've had meetings with the same parent when the advocate wasn't present, and it hasn't been that adversary. I mean, then again, I've had meetings with compliance where it was just a disagreement, and wasn't, you know, and like, okay, we had a disagreement, but everything is still cool. So, you know, but just I mean, just a quick statement in the beginning is just,
I
help.
think
I develop norms from meetings that I go into, that I'm called into as a supervisor, just so that we have a understanding of how we're going to treat each other. But I do say that I would much rather have an attorney in a meeting than I would an advocate. Because an attorney has a set of standards that they live by, and their job is based on. Whereas in my experience, not all parents that bring in advocates, not all the advocates have those standards. So but not all advocates are trained advocates either. So it just, so having, Josh, again, I agree with you. Having a set of standards is a great thing for how we're going to treat each other, but that's just a good meeting practice too.
Correct.
In my opinion.
I think another piece is also, in some cases, just the lack of communication sometimes. And it's not on any particular person's part. It could be just like a perceived lack of communication. But I feel like I've sat in meetings where, as the school team, that we haven't done a really good job of sort of explaining what it is we're doing, or what is our role here? Like, because I'm a related service provider. So we get a lot of, like, my kid comes to school and then they get some outpatient rehab while they're here. And that's not what we do. So being able to help families understand what is the scope of what we're going to do with your child. And I feel like sometimes that might not, that's what maybe doesn't happen. And then there is this, I thought you were going to do this, but now you're not going to do that. So sometimes I just think like it's those kinds of things happen. And then, sometimes families have very strong feelings about things, and, that's where we are. Or a team like the school-based side has strong feelings about what they will and won't do. I don't know, but I think, again, it comes kind of back to communication.
So Beth, I really want to thank you, because that's like, at the Parents' Place in Maryland, that is the bane of our existence, right? Is advocates, right? Because we're not advocates. And so that's why it's so important that families are taught, because they're the one constant in that child's life, right? Where IEP teams change year after year after year, and so valuing that piece. But I think one of the things that you said that was really important, Bess, is the norms, right? Because you just said, oh, well, that's just a good meeting. Well, you're a supervisor, so you know what I'm talking about, right? Not everyone knows what a good meeting is, right? Not everybody knows how to facilitate a meeting so that every voice is heard at the table, right? And we heard from the survey data, right? So I think what would be really, I know it would be helpful from us at the Parents' Place of Maryland, is that there is a real consistent training that the state does. And it's not just, okay, so here's how you write a goal, right? Which is incredibly important, right? Here's how you write a present level of performance. Again, very important. But also this is how these are the real concrete steps to how you facilitate a meeting. This is how you really look at communication styles, right? This is how if this is happening, that's happening, right? And there's just very concrete skill sets that I think if there was that kind of practice, again, I'm like you, Jade, I'm not sure if it's a policy, but that it's a practice, and that there's literally, I don't think it's horrible to also have scripts, right? Particularly for new teachers, right? And then they can customize it a little bit. But how do we almost put like IEP facilitation in a box, right? So that here's your toolkit, and then how do we coach and how do we mentor with those pieces? But I also think it's super important is what are those community partnerships, right? Of where the families do have those relationships with those pieces. They can say, like what Lisa said, right? Hey, you can talk to your team before the actual IEP meeting and have conversations about blah, 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 blah. So when you get to the actual meeting, it moves much. It becomes like, oh, okay, we've already talked about it. Now we can get through the paper until we can figure out, Josh, how to streamline the paperwork, right? Which is really hard. But I really think that would be so incredibly helpful for teachers and IEP teams and then supervisors, right? So hopefully you're not having to detangle where there's been some miscommunication or some hurt feelings along the way.
And even tips and strategies on how to diffuse situations, right? Because if you're someone coming in cold, like fresh out of school, like, and you've got somebody that comes in, like, and you don't know, like, you could unintentionally exacerbate it and make things worse. And that is, and I think you're right, Renee. I think that we presume that, yes, that is good practice, right? But do we know that everybody that's engaging in these knows and has experience with good practice? And if not, how do we build the capacity so that they are engaging in the good practices that we know help support that goal?
Well, it's like Josh said, because you get a new teacher, say he or she's teaching 5th or 6th grade, kid with a disability. Well, guess what? You might have already 6 or 7 years of not great experiences, and that new teacher gets all of those not great previous experiences, right? So that would be really super helpful. Yeah.
So almost like a toolkit resource. Okay.
Yeah. And then a chance to practice it, right? Not just here's your toolkit, and then we're going to show you how to use it, and we're going to model, and we're going to coach, and we're going to mentor, and we're going to, all of those pieces, which then means that you guys have to be allowed the time and the freedom to be able to, how do you carve those pieces out, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
I had a parent start the meeting once with bringing chips and dip and candy. And that meeting went very well. But I will say this too, that the parent also had some questions about how things were stated, and it just set the tone for, okay, this is why we would prefer it to be this way. And, it's okay. It was like, no big deal. I'm not saying every parent should bring chips and dip, but
no, you're saying the school system should have the budget to provide chips and dip. Is that what I heard you say? Yeah.
I'm all for chocolate. So,
but then there'll have to be a work group about which chocolate to bring,
right? And
chip,
allergies, and yes,
Just
exactly.
FYI, everybody, food cannot be purchased with grants.
No, we cannot.
That's right.
So, any final recommendations before we're going to have to go back to the full group? I do think, sort of building off of Renee's point, I think that it is important to have strong external partners like parent training information centers, because doing everything solely through the school lens, if there is that distrust there, sort of having an external trusted third party that parents turn to can help sort of course correct, because the alternative, as Beth pointed out, is they go to these advocates that don't have any framework or knowledge in some instances, and just come in, perhaps because they had a negative experience themselves, and so forth. And so I think building out external capacity that supports and aligns and can serve sometimes as, FYI, here's what we're hearing out on the street, sort of trusted partner as well, is important. But any other thoughts or recommendations?
I would just make sure our partners in higher ed are including communicating with parents, the art of running a meeting, that should be included in coursework, in practice. I at least, I think that's part that maybe often gets neglected, or think they're going to learn on the job in today's day and age. There's various technology tools. You have to check with your LEA what's used, what's appropriate. But I'm in constant communication with my parents, whether it's for anything. They know they have an open line of communication, whether it's with Class Dojo or Google Voice. I know just with my kids, Anne Arundel County just came up with a new, that's called Rooms or something, but there's a new tool on there that I communicate with my kids' teachers with. So, yeah. That's it.
I think the other thing that the state could be doing is ongoing scans about what's working, what's not, identifying best practices that are happening in the LEAs or that parents are feeling positive about, so that they can be pushing it out to other LEAs as well, sort of, and that's sort of an ongoing, not a one and done, but I think that as different places identify tools, solutions, things that work, elevating and pushing them out is going to be really, really helpful, because no sense in reinventing the wheel. If one LEA's got a solution that seems to be working, hey, let's get it out to the other LEAs.
Do we want to review our notes real quick so that okay. So for capacity building, I have schools that have community liaisons, parent engagement specialists serve as a resource to the parents and teachers filling out paperwork for Medicaid, DDA, etc. Dentists that see a student with a significant, that's a huge one. Just having those resources. Cultural competency training for educators on diverse family backgrounds, values, expectations to create those inclusive environments. Family engagement activities held at schools to help build relationships with multilingual families. Using principles of plain language intentionally written for broad populations to understand how plain language would, and then using that plain language within the Maryland Online IEP. Translation of the IEP, being able to translate the IEP into multiple languages, and the ability to sign all forms online or through a mobile device. And then for fully informed cultural barriers, families need periodic workshops in their native language to support understanding and opportunities to engage with and have conversations. And then for trust and partnerships, ensuring that every voice is heard at the table. Consistent training, almost like a toolkit or a resource on how this is how you facilitate a meeting. Scripts for new teachers, like IEP facilitation in a box. Establishing strong external partners that support and align with parent needs to build that trusted partner. And then higher ed coursework on how to deal with families.
Sounds great.
Okay.
And Dr. Hickman was worried we wouldn't meet the time.
I was waiting. I was like going, okay, Dr. Hickman, we made it.
That's good timing, right? We have 51 seconds to spare.
Well,
exactly.
That's lots of time.
That's great. I'll work with this group again next time.
Awesome. Thanks. This was a great group. Really appreciate everyone's insights and feedback. Some really, really good stuff. Thanks so much.
As well.
Betsy, I hit that button by mistake. So
that's okay.
Mid sentence to send myself back to the main room.
I was like, what's happening?
I know. Sorry. I'm so sorry. That was embarrassing.
Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. Hope folks had constructive and productive conversations. I know we definitely did. So I'm looking at I think we had 4 breakout rooms. Love to hear the highlights. So let me look at, group number 1, Dr. Hickman and Molly's group. Is there somebody there who would be willing to share the highlights of their discussion?
Yes, a
Yes,
very detailed response will be provided by Bess Cropper.
Yes, okay. So our first question, capacity building, we said that schools, currently schools that have community liaisons are parent engagement specialists that serve as an invaluable resource to the parents and teachers. So filling out paperwork for DDA, Medicaid, finding dentists that will see students with significant cognitive disabilities, and et cetera. Cultural competency training for educators on diverse family backgrounds, values, expectations to create those inclusive environments. Family engagement activities held at schools to help build relationships with multilingual families. Using principles of plain language intentionally written for broad populations to understand. Also that using plain language in Maryland Online IEP, because the language in Maryland Online IEP can be cumbersome, especially for our ML families. Translating the IEP, actually being able to translate that IEP into multiple languages, and the ability to sign all forms online, because we should be able to sign all forms online in nowadays in Maryland Online, and we can't. And then fully informed, second question, fully informed cultural barriers. Families need periodic workshops in their native language to support understanding. And then opportunities to engage with and have conversations in their native language. For trust and partnerships, ensuring that every voice is heard at the table, consistent training, almost like a toolkit or a resource on for teachers, on the new teachers, on this is how you facilitate a meeting. Could be for OG teachers too. Scripts for new teachers. We said that. And then just kind of like IEP facilitation in a box, a toolkit for IEP facilitators and teachers. And then strong external partners that support and align with parent needs to build those trusted partners that parents so much need when they're in an IEP meeting with all of these school officials. They need a trusted partner there with them. And then and not just for that, but outside too, people that they can trust and talk to and help them through the process. And then someone made the suggestion for higher ed coursework on how to deal with families, because in today's age, they don't often communicate with each other. So they may need that coursework.
I really appreciate the sharing out, and one fairly recurrent theme through a number of your comments, Bess, were really helping the IEP teams in the school know what good looks like. What is the process? What does a really good, respectful, trust-building meeting and way of interacting look like? It seems almost so obvious, yet clearly what we're hearing from feedback that doesn't happen nearly often enough. So I really appreciate that. Group 2, which I think is Allison's group, is somebody who's going to share out.
I tried to get someone else to do it and no one would, so I'm sorry, everyone has to hear me again. Okay, and please jump in, folks, if I miss something. So we talked about, first we talked about interpretation and the need for support for LEAs, especially the smaller LEAs, to have access to interpreters, especially those who can be in person. And we talked about scheduling of meetings and being able to at least have preliminary schedules very far in advance for annual meetings and things like that, so that families can get them on their schedules and plan for them. We talked a lot about time, and that was kind of one of the themes I think that came through in a number of the things that, teachers don't have very much time, and that there's a lot of time pressure, and that having meetings that go on for a long time is really challenging, and that parents feel pressured to wrap things up, and that's just a big challenge. That one of the things we talked a little bit about was sort of the extent to which teacher contracts or there could be time built into the day when teachers wouldn't have all these competing sort of demands and would be able to sort of focus without needing to be concerned about other things they needed to be doing. We talked about Partners for Success and making sure that families know about sort of different ways that they can get support and training. We heard from a lot of the school staff that we had in our group that, you know, there's a real challenge when parents don't engage, are not responsive, don't feel like they want to have their students evaluated, and that they've seen a lot more of that post-COVID. And that MSDE, you know, there was some conversation around MSDE, making sure that there was strong systems of MTSS and support across the state with Fidelity, and that MSDE could also lean in on building trust with families, and that might sort of trickle down to LEAs. We had conversations about that one of the challenges for families is that it isn't just non-English speaking families for whom language can be a barrier, but also just the language of the IEP meeting and the level of expertise that's needed. We talked about having pre-meetings with families. And then in talking about specific changes within the process, we talked about training around how to handle disagreement and disputes. That would be explicit training, and also about facilitation that can happen within the context of an IEP meeting early on for a team so that they can kind of learn how to manage what exactly, sort of to your point, Nate, that what good looks like and how to kind of build that capacity. Not separately, not a parent training and an educator training, but something that happens in the context of a meeting.
Thanks, Liz. I think one thing that just comes to mind that as we think towards either recommendations or the final work plan is we've said for quite a while now how interconnected so many of these conversations are. And I just wanted to note that a lot of these recommendations, which make a ton of sense, when you match that up with some of our prior discussions about teacher burnout, staff shortages, the stress, and being pulled in so many directions from the teaching force. And I think many folks have said, we will never solve most of our problems if we can't solve the retention and the pipeline issues. Just making sure that as this conversation about, which is super important, how it meshes with the need to improve and increase retention and work satisfaction. So just wanted to highlight those interconnections, and I'm sure it's doable, but want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. Group 3, Gary. Somebody from Gary's group willing to share out?
I think that might be our group. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a very robust conversation and a lot of similar themes. So I'll try to just build upon things that have already been mentioned. But we talked a lot about parent training and parent support, maybe something that MSDE could do consistently across the state to build that continuity, I guess, about what families are getting information. We talked about Partners for Success as well, and someone brought up the fact that they hold mock IEP meetings for families. Wouldn't it be interesting to see what kind of a training could embrace both parents and professionals at the same time, looking at what these best practices are for IEP team meetings and discussions? We also talked about the need for these pre-IEP team meetings to really build the parent's capacity to be an active voice and member of the team, having understanding of the different components of the IEP team process, but also the IEP itself. The multilingual liaison has been a really huge part of success for some of the schools. They work up front, they assist with IEP teams as needed. We also talked about more consistent IEP facilitators and schools in terms of that training. And more accountability on the school side of things. So if we want to show up and have a well-run and equitable team meeting, we have to be prepared and show that we are talking about your child outside of the meeting. We are collaborating. We're prepared with information, samples of work to show families and give them better understanding of what we're talking about. We also mentioned that the capacity for parents may shift as they move through the school system. So is there new transitions from early childhood to middle school when you're starting for transition planning? So the needs for parents might change over time, and to be aware of that. We also talked about the single case manager that does not have to do other duties, that can be that family liaison, as some of you have mentioned, and can consistently focus on parents. And also they could get high quality ongoing training and then come back and train the school team in these effective communication strategies, respectful communication strategies. We talked about the being mindful of who's invited into the meeting and the impact of their role or their disposition. So if there's a compliance person there, that's going to take on a less collaborative feel of the meeting from the parents' perspective. And then lastly, starting the meeting with parents' priorities. So giving them the floor first and giving them the opportunity to share. Let's see, communicating with parents prior to the meetings so that they're aware of the agenda, what you will discuss, who will be coming, and ensure that the people that are supposed to be at the meeting are there. One parent remarked how frustrating it is to think that certain people are going to be there sharing particular types of information. And when 30 to 50% of those team members are not present, maybe think about rescheduling. And then last, we had a little bit of conversation around building in flexible times for meetings, as was reported on the survey. So whether it be after hours or Saturdays, that's challenging. We also understand that, speaking to the retention side of things, but we need to be thinking creatively. And remembering regarding retention, there is research to show that if there is a strong family school partnership, that people love their job better and there's higher job satisfaction. And then lastly, thinking about if there's a contentious IEP team meeting, is there a way to have a less formal meeting in between those two that might give some time for problem solving and better understanding everybody's needs for moving forward?
Great. Thanks so much. That was a lot of ground covered in 25 minutes or so. And just wanted to also point out, I think when you mentioned the IEP facilitator, that role came up in a number of our other conversations as being really critical, whether it was the evidence-based best practices, but that definitely is something that has come up in multiple conversations for multiple reasons. And lastly, my group, Leslie, can I ask you to share an overview of our conversation?
Sure. So we talked a fair amount about civility and respect, and that when parents are in IEP meetings and they're addressed as mom or dad, what do you think about that, mom? And everybody else is addressed by their name. That it just sets a tone of not intentional, but the effect is one of disrespect. It's one of making the parent feel not an equal part of the meeting, and that in our world it has become less formal. Addressing people by their first names may be okay if families want that, or if school staff want that, but that just identifying people by their title of mom or dad is really inappropriate. We talked about opening classrooms to families, inviting them into schools. How many PTAs invite families to be part of the PTA and share information with them? That families of kids with disabilities are often really isolated from the rest of the school community, and making them feel a part of it. Going back to the respect issue, we talked about how in medical school now, med students are trained about how to deal with patients, and that maybe higher ed institutions need to build some of that training into how do you interact with a family? How do you, it's not just about running a meeting or talking about assessments. It's the relationships, and that sometimes more meetings can actually be helpful, because you can't really establish a relationship in one meeting a year, but recognizing the workload and what can happen outside of an IEP meeting is helpful. We also talked about the scheduling of meetings and recognized that it is very, very difficult with union contracts to have meetings outside of work hours, but offering incentives and figuring out ways of making that happen is important. And remote meetings have helped a lot, for parents who don't have cars or have other kids they have to take care of or have jobs where they don't get enough time off. Having a remote meeting can be very, very helpful. And maybe investing or having MSDE give grants for technology that will help meetings work better when they're hybrid would be worth looking into. We also talked about interpreters. And we also talked about some of the laws that have been passed in Maryland through the work primarily of advocates, so that getting documents ahead of a meeting, which began in 2010, giving parents the ability to refuse to consent to certain important decisions about their kids is helpful. We also talked about how translation of draft IEPs really helps families whose preferred language is not English participate, because it's virtually impossible to describe a 40 or 50-page IEP when the parent doesn't have a document in front of them that they can look at. And we talked about a lot of other things as well. It was a really robust conversation, and I don't know, Diane and David, what I'm missing, but I'm sure I'm leaving out something.
I think I covered most of it.
Agreed. Great summary. Thanks, Leslie.
Great summary, Leslie, and thanks everybody. I think, just reflecting on all four ShareOgs, so there seems to be a great deal of specificity of the recommendation. So I'm really looking forward to see what comes back to this group in a month or so. And now I will who am I turning it back over to for the wrap up? That'd be you, Dr. Hickman, for a brief update.
Yes, sir. Carmen Brown would be so proud of us getting through this without her. We've had a few little bumps along the way. Just a brief wrap up. Thank you all for engaging with us and providing the feedback for today. So some future meeting dates, as we shared, we're going to continue past December for another very important topic, January 29th. That'll be our final meeting date while we do some updates to the report. The report itself is in its first draft. You should be receiving a copy of the draft. It's probably on the next slide, right? I've already moved on. Yep, you should be receiving an update of the draft of the report for you to review for our December 1. It should be coming to you via email. We're looking at a way in terms of how we did it last time so that you can pretty much redline and then send it back, and then we'll be able to collectively review that, clean that up, address the comments, and then submit a final report to our executive committee by October 28th. As you see, time is ticking, so it is of the essence that you do that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call or contact any of us. As I look at the final minutes, we have it's 6 o'clock, and I won't hold you, but I will say to you that there's been several requests for pretty much updates. We want to provide you with an update on what is actually going on with the recommendations that were made. Wanted to put that in writing, but as we started putting those together, we wanted to give you sort of a one-pager, but currently in front of me, there's about 17 pages, and I don't think you want that. So we're going to try to find a way to provide you with it, and not hold on to it. Just want to say that this is like a work group unlike any other. In many instances, most work groups that I've been a part of, the team has met at the end of the meeting time, the report or the recommendations are made, and then those things go into place. But as we've developed this and navigated through this process since January, we have been, that's what I'm speaking to now, prioritization. We've been adding recommendations each month. And right now we're currently up to 16 as the recommendations go. And we have not been able to, we don't have the capacity on top of all the other things right now to address them all immediately. However, we will provide you an update on what's been done specific to them before our next meeting. That's my charge. That's my promise. You'll have an update on those things. I know we're over time. Let me go to Ms. Perry's. I think I responded to that in a way. What is the timeline for the prioritizing plan? Yep.
Well, more, when
Oh.
will the updated version be shared? I'm looking at the implementation plan, and we just had some questions about when that would be shared.
The implementation, the prioritization plan is up to recommendation number 7. So the next one will not be until we complete all our meetings. Until we finish all the recommendations, we will then re-look at our prioritization plan and update it then. We still have 3 more meetings to go. Liz, you may.
Yeah, but Miss Perry, the when you see the draft December report, the feedback that everybody provided in August that we reported on last month from the conversations about the prioritization, you'll see some tweaks to the prioritization plan based on that feedback. Is that
Right? So when would the update version?
You're going to see it.
That's the
You're going to
question.
see it in the final in the draft report that you're going to receive in the next day or two. You'll be
Okay,
able.
thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. I misread, but thank you very much, Liz, and thanks for the question, Ms. Perry. So you'll see those things, and then we'll be providing updates specific to what we're doing. Okay. All right, we're at the end. There's nothing else. Ms. Zabi, anything else to add?
I have my daughter's first. She turns 14 tomorrow, and I have an IEP meeting tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. So send me all your good vibes for authentic family school partnership around my IEP table.
And I'm totally doing this out of order, but Molly Connor, are you listening?
Yes, Molly Connor is listening.
Molly Connor, can you give us a quick update on 1% waiver?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have finished the draft of the alternate assessment waiver extension. Oh, excuse me. So that should be posted within the next week, if not much sooner. We are going to go through our traditional distribution chain, which means we'll email CSAC, EAC, our special ed directors. It's also going to get posted to the website, spotlighted on the website, and sent out in the superintendent transmittal. So please be on the lookout for that. And we are committed to a full 30 days for public comment.
Thanks, Molly. That's awesome. Yes, the exit ticket will be emailed, and please do respond. As Nate noted, there's obviously really amazing conversations that went on in these small groups, and we want to make sure that we capture everybody's ideas. And probably listening to some of the large group feedback, it sparked some additional thoughts. So let's make sure we get that all down so we can come up with some good, strong recommendations. When we come back in November, we'll be talking about secondary transition, which will be a great conversation as well.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great month. Talk to you soon.